Striking corrections officers and their supporters rally at the state capitol in Albany. They're calling for safety improvements in prisons, an end to 24-hour shifts, and also a repeal for major changes to the HALT Act. The measure reformed the use of punitive housing for misconduct by inmates. Thousands of striking corrections officers have lost their health care and others have been fired. The governor says that workers were well aware of what was at stake.
It created very unsafe circumstances. There are serious consequences. We have warned them day after day after day that you're going to lose your health care. The health care is gone. People are going to go to be arrested. You could be going to jail. You've lost your job. You lost your income. You've lost everything.
A week ago today, we announced an agreement with the independent media of a consent award which required employees to return to work by March 1st in substantial compliance. Unfortunately, our employees rejected that award and did not return to work, making that agreement null and void. I heard my workforce loud and clear, and I will not fail to deliver on what I promised. So tonight, I will deliver the tenets and the content of that agreement to my workforce. It is predicated on them returning to duty tomorrow. And some of the contents include establishing a committee focused on safety and including other unions being offered to participate, dealing directly with the effects of HALT on both the safety of staff and the incarcerated. Commissioner Bray?
I want to be exceedingly clear. This deal is for those who return tomorrow. Any corrections officer or any sergeant who does not return to work tomorrow, the terms will not apply. And this deal will not be offered again. The state will, we are prepared to, and we will, exercise all of our rights and all remedies, criminal and civil, to end this illegal strike. And we will take action against those who continue to refuse to return to work illegally.
Hey there, guys. Well, as you can see behind me, the strike continues here outside Coxsackie Correctional Facility, despite a 6:45 a.m. deadline for CEOs to go back to work without any punishment. They say they are rejecting last night's agreement announced by docs because it wasn't sanctioned by NYSCOBA.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo and from Mexico City with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson from Oakland, California. We're online at Whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as at Don Eduardo Barca. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well. If you fancy a shirt, please contact Andy through Whatsleftpodcast.com, our blog. Thank you. All right. What's today's topic, Andy?
Well, this is a topic that was brought to my attention by Bo, who had previously been interviewed, or we talked with him on What's Left maybe a month and a half ago. And I'm doing a kind of Marxist study group with him now. In upstate New York is a Wildcat strike going on, which, if anybody's been listening to the show, we would imagine I am a big fan of Wildcat strikes. Wildcat strike means not just not sanctioned by your employer, not sanctioned by your union, the workers themselves deciding we're taking action for ourselves in our own name, and that's the best possible strike you can have. Well, here's the riddle, or here's the trick. It's a Wildcat strike of correction officers in New York. And that represented in the past, and we talk about you each week when you talk about it, talk about us challenging the mainstream left. In the past, as part of the mainstream left, I don't think I would have supported I would have said, "Oh, good Wildcat." But I don't think I would have supported such a strike. And I'm still not sure I do, but I have a more complicated feeling about it, and I want to talk with you about it. So that's what I want to talk about today is what do we make of this strike? What do we think about it? And when we say we, what do you think about it? What do I think about it? And I want to use this space to kind of like just sort out my thoughts. So is that an explanation?
Yes.
Yeah. And maybe let's start with just as many facts as we can get. The facts that we think we know, and can I just start with what I think I know, and then you can fill in, and then please stop me if you feel like I say something that you're like, wait, really? That, because there's so many different things. So this Wildcat started about 18 days ago. So it would have been sometime in the middle of February. It involved, I think, about 36 prisons, several thousand workers. And the issues were staffing. Like one of the things, there's many issues, but one of the issues was staffing. One thing that really pissed the correction officers off was a statement, I think, by Dan Marticello, the commissioner of the Department of Corrections. And I'll bring his name up again later, I believe. So I'm talking about him now, where he said, or his department said, 70% staffing is the new 100% staffing, essentially saying that, we're not even going to try to return to the staffing levels we were at. And that has been a real problem for the correction officers because they say they work not up to 24-hour shifts, sometimes 36-hour shifts. I've heard even 48-hour shifts. And they're just pressed, like they don't have time for all the things they need to deal with. Another issue they have is something called the HALT Act. And the HALT Act was something passed in 2020, limiting what prison guards could do in terms of putting people into solitary confinement, limiting who you could put into solitary confinement. Like if you were pregnant, you can't go into solitary confinement. There were other stipulations, but just as importantly, and maybe more importantly, limiting how many hours and days you could put somebody in solitary confinement. I don't know if they were saying it could be unrestricted, but the HALT Act put a restriction that prison guards were saying, oh, this makes us unsafe for us. In addition, I think they wanted more visitor searches because of what they said were drugs getting into the place. They wanted visitor searches and mail searches. And I think they were asking for like TSA level scanners to be in the prison systems, which weren't there. I also want to note, because, that in the context of this Wildcat, there was a black man who was handcuffed and he was a prisoner. I can't remember his name, but it happened very close to the place of the Wildcat. He was like, I did not look at the video, but it was what I was told. The video is pretty clear. This was a man who could not defend himself, got the shit beat out of him by correctional officers, and was killed. And so there are claims that a lot of this Wildcat is a distraction.
And cut prisoner Robert Brooks.
Robert Brooks. Well, there were two. Was that the old one? Because there was
that was the attack, and then there was. I'll find out as we.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, okay. And then there was another one, subsequent one that happened as well, like another person murdered, because that is murder. So, and people who are critical of this are claiming that this whole thing is just as kind of like a cover and a distraction from the kind of brutality and abuse that correction officers do on inmates. And these people, not taking the other things as seriously. And there was a piece on Democracy Now! That literally only said that was like the only issue, which I'll talk about later. I will point out that one of the prisons that had the Wildcat is the prison Attica, which is important because it was the place of a prisoner uprising at the time. And now this is, if you will, in worker terms, it's not an uprising, but it certainly is an action of the workers opposing the state that employs them and opposing the union that says that represents them. And over again, you will hear the actions of these workers is unsanctioned and illegal. And there have already been workers who have been on this Wildcat who've been fired. I know 10, and I heard up to 30 now have been fired. many have already said that they had healthcare removed, and they are being threatened with arrest because of what are called Taylor laws, which basically say, as a public employee, you can't do a wildcat strike. And these are laws in New York; they're not federal laws, and that it's actually a breaking the law for a unionized worker who has a bargaining agreement that they work with, and they have like a union, and their union is called NYSCOBA, and it's NYSCOPBA, New York State Correction Officers and Benevolent Police Association. That's the name of the union that represents them, which had reached an agreement. I don't know how long ago, but it was maybe less than a year ago. But clearly, the agreement did not go far enough for a set of workers, so they have taken action into their own hands. Anything else? There are some up-to-date things, but I'll just say, I'll leave it at that. I'll start there.
So the strike started the same week charges were filed against prison guards at the Marzi Correctional Facility in Utica, New York, who brutally beat to death handcuffed prisoner Robert Brooks. And then there was a 61-year-old man who has been reported dead. I don't know if
That's more recent. That's more recent. Other officers were, I don't know, I know less about that one, but other officers were supposedly being, what is that, on leave as a result of that brutality there.
All right. Well, anyhow, yes, there has been some very questionable things happen, and the reason why, the timing of the strike, some people might say.
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, now our points of views being shared here. I have some difficulties, and when you called me today, I didn't want to express them. I wanted to express them here, so I just listened to you. And like you, I have also have mixed feelings about this. I think I have had more mixed feelings about prisoner correctional officers than actual police officers on the ground. I don't know why. I'm trying to figure that out.
Mhm.
And as we said, we're trying to sort this out online here between us. And I think it is because there is some unspoken rule, I guess, there to say that police officers are to maintain the good in society out on the streets, to curb, and that's obviously not the case. But a prison is literally for criminals, for people who have been already, like a police officer is normally seen as going after someone that is robbing someone who's innocent, or going after someone who is trying to hurt someone else out in the public. And whereas a prison is it's a detention center, and most prisoners, I would say, have sentences that shouldn't even have those sentences, but are there as part of the system. And therefore, correctional officers only enforce what the sentence deems them to penalize them for. So there's a lot of corruption, and there are and the abuse of solitary confinement. And if you don't obey, and if you don't abide by the way the game works, then you're going to definitely be used and abused. Again, I'm not saying that this perspective of mine is like the correct one. I'm still trying to sort this out. All I'm saying is, I think for me, that's why these things are separated from me. They still are workers upholding or enforcing what folks at the top, or the elite class, deems to be what the rest of us should be doing, right? We are to be monitored, managed by the other working class folk. And that is what they're being used for. And I think for me, what's hard is that if one set of workers strike and the other set of workers strike, but they don't support each other, then I don't know if we have the common means, if we're on the same page. And I saw a lot of people during 2020, even from different backgrounds and different camps and fields of work, come together. And we were on the same page about a lot of things. We might have had differences, different ideologies. And it almost seemed like some of the liberals were policing other workers, like teachers. We had that conversation.
Right.
And I still feel that striking is a means of getting workers together and opposing the ruling class. And I have hopes that striking and shutting down and occupying is a way to bring back or take over what belongs to us. But I may have issues, and this is where we're coming into it. We're coming right at it, like conflict arises with what is our intention and what do we see as a vision for each other, because I don't know them. So everything I have read is just information, and you filled in a lot of the blanks, but I haven't spoken to them. And what is their field? What is their vision for the future? Because we may not share it, because they might still believe in maintaining order. And if they believe in still maintaining order and wanting solitary confinement for prisoners and don't have the same kind of vision, I'm not going to support your strike. So whilst I do believe that striking and occupying and shutting down and taking over our streets is important, we may not be sharing the same vision, that I may not have any reason to go and support that strike, even if I do think that is a tool of the working class. And it's very confronting to say that, because I have thought that I would support. But then I thought of the 6th of January, where I thought I support in insurrection. Actually, I do support a revolt.
Mhm.
I do support an uprising, a revolution, not revolution. But I'm not there with the 6th of January, because that's not my revolution. And a lot of the rhetoric that I'm hearing is that, maybe I'm mistaken, but it was a support for Trump. And Trump's simply going to maintain order as he is doing now. And that's not for me. That's not my train, as I've said several times. That's not my train of revolution. Which I don't really think it's a revolution, but I was quite I was very impressed by the taking over the Capitol. I don't think it's the only one. I think we've had other amendments like that in history. But I'm saying, if we're not aligned on some areas, at least, because I saw a lot of areas where we were aligned on 2020 with a lot of other folk, conservative folk, libertarians. But if we're not aligned, and I haven't, that's the reason why I was struggling with today's episode, because I was thinking, as I was reading a lot, I do feel Democracy Now! Was one-sided, was looking at the people who are affected on the other side, prisoners. And that's fine. I do support abolition of prisons. I do support prisoners. And, I support the abolition of the state, control. However, it doesn't align with me to support workers that want certain benefits only to go back to their positions and continue enforcing what the people at the top are asking them to enforce. And that's the struggle for me, because then we're not on the same page. Then you're just asking for what you just want to go back. You're not asking for a revolution. You don't want to go further, which I'd be on the same team with you, even if we had political different ideologies. But it doesn't seem like it. It seems like you want to go back wearing your collar. And if you want to go back and wearing your collar or your harness, and being controlled, but you just want your harness to be loosened a little bit, or you just want, oh, I want a little bit of, I don't want to, I don't want, to you to pull so hard on the, what do you call the la correa?
Leash.
The leash. If you just want the leash to be loosened a little bit, that's all you're asking for. That's your demand. Then we're not going to be on the same team. We're not on the same page. So that's my feel on this. And I've been reading and reading, and I was just thinking, the only thing I can really do is just go talk to those strikers. That would be the best thing for me to do. And to really see what's up for them. What do they want out of just, better working conditions?
Well, I think they've been pretty clear. And this is why I do think that the democracy now was not just one-sided, but it's basically another example of the left lying. Because I think it was trying to avoid the complications that I want to get into in this discussion. Like, what do we do about it? Is like, they feel overworked. They're understaffed. They want to have more power to push on what they call misbehavior of people who are in the prison. They want to be able to monitor things that come into the prison. They want to be able to monitor visitors more often. Like, that's not unclear. Like that, and you can see it. They want the HALT Act removed. They want to be able to. They don't want any restrictions on solitary confinement, which is torture. So let me go back to where you started, which is.
And can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say is I do support the military, police officers, correctional officers, but I support them to come onto our side and they're workers and to take up the arms and to support the revolution that we can do as working folk, but not if they want to go back to their field.
Okay.
So
Let's see if
most people might say, well, the police is our enemy. How could you want them as well? Because they're workers as well. I do see them as workers as well, but they're enforcing the law. And it comes, at some point where you might just meet, you might cross roads with them. You had one person that was in a civil suit with you.
Mm-hmm. So let me go back to where you started with the prisons. Like you, I don't agree with the existence of prisons. Like, prisons are concentration camps for workers built by the capitalists. They are built, funded by the capitalists, built by other workers, and then other workers put in there to do their bidding to basically, they say it's to deal with crime, but it's to basically enforce the built-in criminality of capitalism. Capitalism is theft from workers every second of every hour, of every day that they work, because a part of the value of their work is being kept by the capitalist in the form of surplus value. And some of that is called profit. And even on its own terms, if you compared the amount of the value of all the things stolen by working class criminals compared to capitalist class criminals, the capitalist class criminals are stealing way more, even on their own terms. Not just the theft that's just literally built into their system, but what we would call corruption. The corruption is not as bad as the actual theft built in the system. So let's make no bones about it. Prisons are infrastructure for maintaining the class divisions and maintaining the rule of the capitalists over workers who got the wrong idea that they needed to get some for themselves, whether it be through theft or workers who were desperate who killed, or, like you said, workers who didn't do jack shit and they're in prison anyway. Because I do think of them as closer to concentration camps. And for me, I don't make a distinction between police and correction officers. Both of them are henchmen of the state. There's another problem, and because of that, in the past, the left has often saw that section of workers as not the ones we would support their actions because they're so ideologically controlled by the state, and so their job is so built on naked repression. Well, I've come to think of my job as a teacher as not that different than that, and much of that is from 2020, and we saw the role of teachers as it's not as naked, but the level of ideological violence that the public education system or the education system is used to enforce, and the level of head fixing and the degree to which we as teachers are just another side of the correction officer and the police. Like, I don't make that distinction any longer between the good workers and the bad workers, if you will. All of us are, particularly those of us who work within the state, all of us have our hands dirty as much, in my opinion, as much as the correction officers. And so I support teacher strikes, but teacher strikes don't generally ask to say, oh, I'm going to torture you. I want to torture you more. There will be teacher strikes that will talk about being able to be more punitive with children, and they have been, and you know, things that would basically make the state more controlling of the workers that they're educating. There have been teacher strikes that do that. So that used to be more that complication used to, there used to be a separation for me about those workers versus these workers, in terms of teachers versus correction officers. And I can't see a distinction between them as much anymore. All public employees are generally officials of the state made to basically enforce state rule, and that all has to go. I think the January 6th thing you brought up is a good example, because for me, what's most important about what these correction officers are doing, I completely disagree with them on the HALT Act. I don't want them to even be, I don't want there to be prisons. So why do I care whether the prisons are understaffed or not? I don't. But what I support and what the prison guards are doing is the Wildcat, is them taking action against their union and against the state. Because currently, those workers who are out on the line are finding themselves up against the state, they're not sitting there saying, who's the inmate I'm going to beat the shit out of? They're facing down the National Guard, who was brought in to replace them, and they're not facing them down, which I think actually, if you were going to do a Wildcat effectively, that's what you'd want to do. You'd want to stop them from coming in. And they are acting on their own initiative. I ask myself this question. If teachers did a Wildcat to get more remote work, to get more AI in school, I would not agree with the terms, but I would agree with the action. Like, I would agree with teachers who are saying, you know what, we are going to organize with ourselves and stand up for ourselves. And if for whatever reason it was a demand that put them in opposition to the state, which that's what's happening with these correctional officers right now. That's why they're being threatened by the state. That's why they're being threatened legally to be put in jail. They're being threatened with fine, and of course, by their employers, being threatened with losing your job and your health care. They are not right now fighting prisoners. They are fighting the state. And that is the part I support, because I'd have to ask myself, if the state came in and said, we're going to crack down even more on these guys, am I neutral on that? Do I support the state doing that? I don't. I would want the workers to win. I would want the workers to fight them back. And, you know, if this was happening in Dublin or what have you, I don't know about going out on the picket line with them. I don't. That's a tough one for me. But if someone says, whose side are you on? The workers who are wildcatting, whether they be police officers or correction officers, or the state that's coming to crack their heads down, I say, no, I'm with the workers who are wildcatting. And something else I want to say, because there was an agreement reached. The union and the commissioner for the Department of Corrections reached an agreement about a week ago that said, hey, all you workers, come back in, and we'll do a 90-day halt on the HALT Act. We will, no punishment for anyone. Even the terminated workers can come back. We're going to look into some of these questions of conditions and things like that. And the response of the workers to that was, fuck you. They didn't come back from the union. They didn't come back from the commissioner. To me, that's meaningful. To me, that is the spirit of independence that I support in workers for themselves saying, this is what we need to do. Now, that's going to be tested again today, because you probably don't know about this, and I just found out about it today. But today, the commissioner reached an independent agreement with leadership of the Wildcat, meaning NYSCOBA, the union leadership, is not in this agreement, but the commissioner, the employer, said, hey, we're going to give you some of those other things we told you before, and it's called a memorandum of understanding. It's not in the contract because it can't be in the contract, because if it's in the contract, it would be done with the union, NYSCOBA, but it's not. So the commissioner is saying, we are going to assure you that there will be no longer than you will not be getting 24-hour shifts any longer. And he says he's heard that that's a big deal and said, come back tomorrow morning and it's all good for all of you. Even like again, the fired workers and you get this other stuff. If you don't come back tomorrow morning, then and there's a woman who's sitting right next to him. Then she said, here's what we're going to do. Bam, 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 bam. Nothing. This deal is off the table. We're going to terminate you. We're going to do everything we can to bring the force of the state against you. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Like, unfortunately, this episode is going to be up about 6 or 7 days from when we do it. But I think that's going to be an interesting test. The minute that Wildcat ends, it no longer has any interest to me. The minute they no longer stand up for themselves against their union and the state, they're just like teachers, flunkies of the state, looking to get back in there so they can crack the heads of more workers. And I don't support it. What I support right now is their opposition to the state. I can't say I support their demands. I can't. All I can do is support their act of independence as workers, basically taking their own lives into their own hands and choosing to do that. That I, without a hesitation, support. And I support them doing so in the name of opposing the state that is their employer. And that part I support, and I'm not neutral on that. I don't know what to do with the fact that I support the actions, but I have no support for the demands behind those actions. At the end of the day, I have to ask myself, do I give a shit whether a teacher makes a demand for $40 an hour or $60 an hour? Honestly, no. The whole thing is corrupt. The whole thing is broken. That shit's got to be destroyed. The education system has to be destroyed. Why do I want a head fixer getting double paid? You know what I'm saying? So my mind has been changed about some of those things as it relates to correction officers and police officers, because I'm so convinced that as a teacher, I'm almost no different than them. One thing I'll say that people that leftists would challenge me on is that historically in struggle and in revolutionary struggle, teachers will do a revolution, military people will do a revolution, but they say police rarely are part of a revolution. Police are usually brought in to enforce, and even National Guard can, but that's if your National Guard doesn't do it, that's when the military takes the other side, and your revolution, the people who tried to tamp down the revolution are really cooked once they bring in the National Guard or the military, and the military refuses. So there's a historical truth in that says there's something different about police officers, possibly correction officers, that says they'll never side with your revolution. But what I will say is these workers are acting as a bit of a vanguard of the working class, because this is what every worker needs to be doing, is organizing for what they themselves want and doing it, saying, fuck my boss, fuck my union. This action that's currently being taken is going to be very much seen as like an anti-union action, right? Because the boss is reaching an agreement with these leaders and not with the union. I don't give a shit about that. Fuck the union. The union is a bureaucracy meant to control workers. And when workers get off the leash, that's a good thing. So I'll put that out there and see what you have to say.
Well, I mean, a wildcat strike is when it is independent of whether it is approved and authorized, whether it is approved or not approved by a union leader.
It is explicitly not approved by the union.
But what I've understood is maybe a union leader could say, "Well, we have support them." I mean, they could, but it's independent. It doesn't matter. It's not important. The people who organize and don't ask for union leadership's approval, whether they are applauded afterwards or whatever they want, they move forward without union leadership. Is my point. And that is what makes a wild strike applaudable. It's wonderful. I support that. But I think like you think, well, I don't know if I would be there on the picket lines with them, supporting them, because the demands are not my demands. These aren't things that I would like to support, and I'm not for that. What's interesting is that you're saying this, and I wish I had the numbers with me at this time, had I known what you were going to say. But I remember several, and specifically, I remember two of the, what do you call it, of the marches, and of the marches during 2020 in our field, which was public education, the reopening of schools march, and the demand to keep schools closed. The one that the union had, UESF,
Right.
and the one that was organized. I'm not sure if all of it was organized by, or Decreasing the Distance, now formerly called as a Parent Coalition. And I'm not sure how many teachers supported staying or reopening schools. I'm not sure at this time.
What do you mean?
The majority
I
of
know
them,
that a ton of them wanted to stay out of school.
right? But I don't know the numbers. I just don't have the
Okay.
numbers. And when I remember going to the UESF rally, I saw a lot of teachers show up, people I recognized, educators, security, paraprofessionals, teachers. I saw them. But when we went to the reopening of schools rally, I was a minority of us.
They only went there to
a few others.
they went there to argue with us. That's it.
Yeah, and then there was a part of the UESF. So what I'm saying is, so you're saying if the teachers had held a Wildcat strike, would you have supported the Wildcat strike?
A wildcat strike to keep the schools closed, if you will, right? Because the union.
Mm.
That's a tough one, Eduardo. But if the union was for keeping the schools closed, that's the problem. Yes, that wildcat I would have definitely supported, but you're talking about a different one. You're talking about a situation where the union wants to keep. No, in that case, and I'm in that union, I'm going to be with a set of workers who are like, no, we got to reopen the schools, right? Because this is a situation where I'm in a union. My union happens to take the right position. I'm going to be like, no, you guys can try to like do that action. I'm not joining you on that. I'm going back in there to open those schools up because we need to ally with the parents and stuff like that.
You wouldn't, but your Wildcat strike, the Wildcat strike to keep schools closed, would you support?
No, because that would be in a situation where the union happens to be taking the right position. So the set of workers, there it'd be like.
I feel like the state was pressuring teachers finally. I mean, Mayor London Breed, for whatever reason, she was already starting to push teachers to go back to school, and union leaders weren't.
No. That it wasn't. The state was all like, they had the health department that was operating to basically say, keep all this shit shut down. They would make a cover and say, oh, it's the unions. But no, the state and the unions were lockstep on this stuff. So it wasn't the unions that made the schools shut down. The state, the state had decided that. That's like Gavin Newsom and London Breed.
I know that. I was there. I mean, what I'm saying is, maybe I'm not explaining myself right, is I think maybe this might not be comparable, and you might say, no, it's not comparable.
Yeah.
I think workers did not want to go back to school, and you didn't support that. Workers, the teachers, educators, they didn't want to go back to school.
And I didn't support them. And here's the thing that's important about it. Teachers, if you happen to have a smaller union that was saying, no, we're not going to go with the okie doke what the state is, I'd be loving that. And those workers who are wildcatting to do so are basically emissaries of the state. They're basically doing Gavin Newsom and Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Fauci's, they're carrying water for him. So the action, the action about this Wildcat is, it is not supported by the state. It is not one that the state says, "Oh, thanks." It's one that puts these workers in opposition to the state, against the state bureaucracy, against their union bureaucracy. And the element of democracy in that, of liberatory independence, that's what I support. And if the state came down and if the agreement, those workers don't just refuse the union agreement that was a week ago, but also refuse this agreement today, where they've got to show up to work tomorrow, or else kind of thing. If they oppose that, and the state comes even harder down on them, I'm with those workers in terms of opposing the state. I don't like what they're doing. I don't like that job. Prisons have got to go, but their actions have, what I would say, a revolutionary kernel to them, because these people are willing to stand up for what they believe in, which frankly, that's one of the hardest things. Most of what workers believe in right now is not the same thing I believe in, but I will support any set of workers who are fighting against the state to stand up for what they believe. I will support that. I won't support the action. I might not even the belief in the idea, but I'll support them doing that, because that is going to be a necessary part of the working class rebuilding itself as a class for itself. And so that's where I'm at right now on this. And it's very helpful for you to push this stuff on, these questions on me.
Yeah, that's why I struggle, because you say that that's what you're at, and whether you might change later. I mean, it is the state where you have arrived. I don't think I have arrived there yet.
Yeah. And you would say, if the state, if the workers don't go back to work tomorrow, first of all, you obviously don't think the workers should go back to work, right? But you don't, and you don't even support the existence of the prisons. But if the state started cracking heads because these guys won't go to work, do you take sides on that, or do you like,
You know, it's interesting. I think I would, because whatever happens to those workers, the state doing whatever that happens, that I've learned my lesson now, would then do the same thing to other workers whose ideology I would be aligned with.
Yes.
So,
right.
Consequence for them would also be a consequence for me eventually,
Right.
if I was to stand up to that.
And maybe in that regard, it's like if this strike was happening near me, and they needed support in, like hospital support or whatever kind of thing, money support to do this, I think I would give them support as a fellow worker, and say, I'm against prisons, but I believe in what you guys are doing and standing up against the state. And so maybe I would offer them a support in that struggle, even if I don't think there's a single demand that I believe in, more prison guards, because that's what they would need.
I pulled up the demands here, trying to look for them, but
No, they're
not.
I think you got them right.
The ones that you listed, they're not ones that I agree with. It's just not on my agenda. These aren't things I'm going to fight for.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd go so far as to help or what. It's a struggle, but I think I'd change the rhetoric online, change the rhetoric with friends in my community about how I see this and what we're doing actually right now. Whereas I think a lot of people on the left, as we have seen, you pointed out Democracy Now, and I have also brought it up with someone else. It's blocked. Like, you can't even see past the importance of the strike. All they see is these are correctional officers, correctional
officers,
correctional officers, and they are enforcers of the law, enforcers, pit bulls of the ruling class, and that's what we have to oppose.
Yeah.
But that's not the nuance of it's lost of what revolutionaries deem or think that the strike, the tool of the strike, is for. What is it important in ours, like as a way to put a dagger through the managerial class and the state.
Okay. So And again, I'm not sure about what I'm saying, but it's how I feel right now. Like in terms of, okay, this is what I'm thinking this through. But it's very thin gruel to be thinking, like, holding on to this, not just a strike, but a wildcat strike. That's a very important piece of it. In a prison like Attica, where only, how many years would it have been? I think 60 years ago today, 65 years ago today, you had a prison uprising of the prisoners saying, some of them saying prisons got to go, but certainly calling for radical demands of reform and change, and connected to the revolutionary struggles they saw happening around them. Like, there's not even a moment where we'd hesitate. In fact, Eduardo, was there earlier in What's Left where there was a prison something going on that wasn't there?
We did cover prison strike.
Yeah, prison strike. Yeah. Like, that is a no-brainer, but it does show, in my mind, it shows how difficult and how kind of backwards the situation for the class is right now. That what you have, who's taking action in a decisive way are, correction officers, not the prisoners, the correction officers. And I don't know, somehow there's something in that's a lesson about how degraded class struggle has become, and class consciousness has become in the United States. Although I would say that workers could learn something from these workers. They could, like, about, we don't have to wait for a fucking union.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, continue. No, I think that's a perfect example. What they're doing
Yeah.
is almost admirable.
Yeah.
Whereas I see a lot of teachers chicken out.
Exactly. And, they are ultimately asking to go back in there and make it hard on those prisoners. And I understand how they say, like, look, if we don't sleep, you're going to get us doing crazy shit more likely. I agree with that. But I'm not interested in having prisons, like, not these prisons, not the ones that are concentration camps for workers, and for the most poorly treated workers in the country. And I don't mean poorly treated because they're in prison. I mean poorly treated in the country. And, oh, by the way, you suck, you're going into the prison. And they're scapegoated as criminals when the people who rule, who are literally, in terms of the rules on their own terms, are breaking the rules worse. And when you think about how the system works, it's just criminality piled on criminality. So this prison system, in many ways, is used to hide at a deep level how much criminality exists at the top of society. And it's unfortunate. I mean, there are many revolutionaries. Oh gosh, who was the Black Panther who was killed?
Which one of them?
Yeah, exactly. Who was killed in prison? I got to get his name because.
Yeah, why don't you look it up quickly?
Yeah, George Jackson.
Yes, was killed in August. I'm not sure what year, but yes.
Yeah, George Jackson wrote Soledad. It was George Jackson. He wrote Soledad Brother. When you think about figures like him and others like that. Who was the Native American guy who
just was released?
Geronimo Pratt or something?
Oh.
Anyway, we shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
But there's the prison system. Malcolm X has been a cauldron of revolution, and of creating political figures. So, that if we think about where revolution is going to come from, it's not going to come from correctional officers wildcatting. But I think there is a lesson to be learned here. And I will say that to the extent that they challenge the state, that's the extent that I support them.
Yeah. We should mention that you also have maybe a very slight connection to your organizing efforts in the prison system. I remember you worked with a prisoner.
Oh, yeah. There was a person who I was sending letters to and would visit around the death penalty and stuff like that. Yeah.
I only discovered it because one time I was over your house. I had a picture and I said, "Who's that?" And then you said, "Oh, it's something I was working on a project and
I can't remember his name too.
I tried to organize and it didn't turn out to be the way that I thought
Yeah.
it would. But nonetheless, you were trying something.
Yeah.
Be careful, Andrew Lipson has secrets.
Right.
Organizing efforts anywhere. No, well, I think it's important that you did say that because I do maybe find it hard in the way to tell others, look how admirable the folks of the 6th of January are doing something, and we're doing jack shit.
Yeah.
You're on our side, and
Yeah.
people say, "What? You support what?" And they can't see past what I'm trying to say. And what I'm trying to say is, same way I see people who believe in God, they have faith. You know, I admire and envy, almost envy faith.
Let me ask a question because I
I'm
agree
not a
with
believer
you.
in God.
Yeah, I agree with you in the spirit of the idea of insurrection. But which action do you think would be would you describe as more independent, truly independent? The thing organized around January 6th, or what the
So this
yeah.
depending. Yeah.
Yeah. Because like the FBI were all over that thing, it looks like.
Yeah, that's what it looks like too. But I do find that this is more autonomous.
Yeah. And I don't think it's right the way Democracy Now! Talked about this, because I think they are misleading people because they don't want to have this discussion that you and I are having. And that's the left. That is like the pathetic left that wants to have easy answers to things that don't even take up the difficult questions.
Yeah, we've taken up a few difficult questions here.
Yeah.
Reparations, DEI,
Yeah.
identity politics. Yeah. And so, I mean, the only thing that we'll have to wait is what the outcome. I think you said tomorrow we'll see what.
Yeah. I'm gonna make my prediction. If the working class is as lame as I think it is, I think they're gonna go for it, and I think this thing will be resolved largely as a result. Because what happened, the last agreement that got reached, the media put out, "Oh, tentative agreement reached," and like that, and they thought they were just gonna, kind of steamroll workers back to it by saying everyone is agreeing to this. But very few of the workers came back, or enough of them stayed out that the strike was essentially unaffected. My tendency is to believe that this time that they might get the workers this time. And if that's the case, then it's a wrap. This thing's over and there's nothing to support because these folks are just going to be able to do more bad things to people in prison.
Quick update. We're going to insert a clip and give feedback or give some update on what's been happening with the correctional officers workers strike. Andy, can you show the clip first?
Okay.
Strike is over. After 22 days of an illegal strike, the governor and I are happy to report it has now ended.
We're also following up tonight on the latest from the illegal corrections strikes. We just heard there from the Department of Corrections as the strike reaches week 3.
And now officials are saying that the strike is over, but apparently not everyone went back to work today.
More than 10,000 correction officers are either back on the job or ready to go back to work after ending a 2-week statewide strike. But more than 2,000 officers who failed to return to work by 6:45 Monday morning have been fired.
The 2,000 plus individuals that were terminated today represents those individuals that were still striking at the 6:45 a.m. deadline today when they had to report to their facilities.
The state and NYSCOBA, the union representing prison guards, reached a deal over the weekend to try and end the statewide strikes.
With the strike now over, Governor Kathy Hochul is taking drastic measures against the now former COs who will have to start looking for new jobs.
Governor Kathy Hochul signed an executive order banning those former strikers from being hired for any state job. She's also recommending that the former officers would be removed from the state's police registry, meaning that they wouldn't be able to work as local police either.
I'll find a way to provide for my family. and it's not going to be at the expense of the state.
Devin Hooper used to be a corrections officer at Upstate Correctional Facility in Malone, but now he's one of the more than 2,000 COs who lost their jobs when they didn't return to work on Monday, and now he and his family are trying to navigate their new reality.
I'm doing okay. My family's holding up the best they can, especially with cutting the health insurance and, everything else that they've done to hurt us.
Despite losing their jobs, many former corrections officers still gathered outside the 3 state prisons in Malone on Tuesday, while supporters say they've been betrayed.
They left them behind. It's very hurtful. And I feel for them because their whole life's uprooted now.
That's 2,000 correction officers, correct?
Correct.
And how many were total? 10,000?
It looks like it was 12,000 out to all total. 10,000 supposedly went back.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is because we recorded this last week on Thursday, and on that Thursday, I had said that the state had reached a deal with the Wildcat strikers that did not include Nyskoba, and Nyskoba had not consented to the deal that was reached. But what the state was saying was, y'all better return to work by Friday morning, 6:45 a.m. And then there was another set who had to return by 6:45 or 6 o'clock p.m., right? And they said, if you don't, then we're not. If you remember that one woman was like, we're not going to return to this deal. You won't get another deal, blah, blah, blah. And like you just heard me say, I was pretty sure those workers were going to agree to that. Surprisingly, they didn't. The workers instead say, hey, wait a second. This is the Wildcat workers basically saying, wait a second. Y'all the state are trying to reach a deal and cut out our union. We're not going to agree to that. We're not going to let you just agree to something trying to cut out our union. You have to get them on board. And you can't try to go around them. That sounds like union busting to us, which I thought was a very smart and wise move, because the workers who were out had been perceived as like anti-union and things like that. Secondly, I had heard that many correction officers who were working were in support of the Wildcat people. So they made a really smart move. So that I was surprised. I was surprised to see the Wildcat carry on. There were a few workers that came back, but not many at all. So again, this was the second attempt at reaching a deal and pushing them, second or third. Can't quite remember because there was another thing that had gone on. But again, this was one of many multiple attempts of the state to force the Wildcat strikers to give up, and they didn't. So what happens instead? The Department of Corrections, the head person, does talk to Nyskoba and reaches a deal with Nyskoba, and Nyskoba now signs on to the terms, which is basically 90-day stop of the HALT Act. Yes, we're going to monitor mail and do all sorts of things like that. It sounds like they're even talking about TSA scanning of people who are coming in, and no more 24-hour shifts. That was part of that agreement as well. And so once they got Nyskoba on board, then they issued a new threat, which basically said, okay, Nyskoba's on board. We've got an agreement. Now you better do it by Monday morning, or you're going to be terminated. And that's where you see what happens here. It looks like about 10,000 of the workers returned to the line. Returned to work, or stated they intended to return to work. And 2,000 tried to hold the line.
There are a lot, by the way. 2,000.
That is a lot. 2,000 said, no, we're not doing that.
I'd like to see 2,000 teachers hold a strike.
Forget it. Exactly. But those 2,000 were ultimately abandoned by their fellow Wildcat strikers and abandoned by the union. Like, whatever agreement the union reached, it counted on splitting up the Wildcat people. It counted on dividing them between the people in the Wildcat who were most determined to carry on the strike, will fire those motherfuckers, and the people who were starting to feel the heat, and wanting to get back to work and felt like this was their last best offer. So let's be clear, it wasn't just the state here who was playing division, which of course the state would. That they're going to do that. They're capitalists, and they should divide workers because they want to beat us. So divide them. But unions here, the union leadership, played right into that strategy, and actually I think promoted it because signing on to the idea and not getting some sort of agreement that said no child left behind. Injury to one is an injury to all, basically, which is a very important union principle. And those Wildcat strikers abandoned their most militant, most determined leaders and participants. And then Governor Hochul, the department fired those people, and then Governor Hochul says, "You're never going to get a job in this town. You can't be in the Department of Corrections." And to my end, it's a dismal ending, because really, obviously, neither of us support the Department of Corrections. Neither of us support prisons. Prisons are going back. Yay, 90-day removal of the HALT Act, so they can put people in for the next 90 days. They can put people in solitary for longer, and they get to put pregnant people in solitary. That was one of the groups that couldn't be put in there. And now you have the people who were most determined were cut loose. So I think big win for the capitalists today, and a big loss for working class. But it's not surprising. I don't know to what extent people internalize the notion of solidarity, but it was cracked and destroyed by the state and by the union and by their fellow workers.
Yeah. I just I go back to our episode on, do unions actually support workers? What are unions? I mean, their purpose is clear, but I don't think it's aligned with what's actually happening if they're also bureaucrats that are trying just to work with the system.
And the deeper question is, do workers support workers? Do striking workers? Does the most militant section of the correction officers group, do they support the working class? At one level, it's obviously not, because they're going to go in there and crack heads of other workers, right? That's what they do every day, because they're going to go in and beat the shit out of fellow workers. But they did not, or unions, I definitely believe union leaders are not interested in any meaningful solidarity and developing that. They certainly don't hold to the notion of an injury to one is an injury to all, which is a crucial component for workers to internalize. If we in our struggle are prepared to cut people loose, we will lose. It has to be all or nothing. And if we don't fight that way and fight for that, then we will lose. And also, we're giving up on principles that are meaningful. But we will get defeated at our weakest link, and that's why we have to support that weakest link. And so, I think what we saw was not just the union betrayal, but you saw fellow worker betrayal. And one could look and be like, well, what do you expect from people whose jobs are to beat fellow workers, and to torture them and imprison them and support a place for the set of the working class that is in fact the most downtrodden. Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why a prison uprising is going to be much more truly militant and much more historically inspiring than a correction officer's Wildcat. But I still would say that what those workers did, if we think about the federal workers who are being under attack by Trump right now, if they did even one half of what these workers were doing, it would set the country on fire. And they're not. So I support the act of the Wildcat strike, but I'm also relearning the lesson that, workers whose job it is to beat other workers, you're not going to get much. It's going to be if it's going to be a tough ask to expect them to have solidarity with fellow workers, that's going to hold.
As much as I don't like the fact that we are applauding correction officers, I think this is a good lesson. Then this episode provides that lesson for the rest of us. And if there is working class movement, we should learn from this to hold the line together.
Yeah. I mean, one could have imagined that the people who are all out there would said, we're not going to agree to this if you're going to have any terms of punishment for any of us, and we're not going to debate based on some arbitrary deadline you set, and not go out until that. And that the union would have to fight for that, and the Wildcat people will have to fight. The Wildcat strikers would have to fight for that. But clearly, they didn't have that conception.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see what happens to those workers. Those are 2,000 workers being blacklisted, essentially.
Yeah. Again, I don't though want to make that big a distinction between the people who are correctional officers in prisons and those of us who are teachers in schools. There's not a giant difference there. What do you think?
I said it when I think it just hit me in 2020, that when you start policing anybody, it isn't very different from what you're doing as a police officer.
Yeah.
But I mean, that epiphany came to me once I was driving and we were having a conversation, and I was so upset and angry that these were teachers being used by the state, and the teachers were actually complying and being complicit, and they were all right with it. And they were like, we have to follow this order. We have to follow this order. This is something we have. And I just thought, I was angry. And I remember saying to you, they don't see them as any more different than a police officer.
Yeah. And I struggled to respond to that. I don't know, because I was not happy with the time either. So, and that has left a big impact on me in terms of how to look at the working class.
Yeah. My thoughts on correctional officers and police officers, like I'm saying, is just the perception that they're different has an impact on how I maybe perceive them. I'm not saying that in my truest of hearts that they are different.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, yes, they're the same. But I'm just, the way that my brain was just digesting their placements or where they're at in the fields of horses.
And if I'm to get this right, you don't have as much of a trigger in relation to police officers as you would with correctional officers. Is that right?
Maybe because I've also had family deal with being in correctional facilities.
But you got messed with by a police officer. Remember that episode?
Yeah, I did. I just think that maybe I don't know. Maybe it's the rhetoric that recently that has been against police officers, that it is easier. Like, I think this is why it's not good to use your own anecdotal experiences, but I have been able to almost slide off of situations where I have been in afraid that something might happen to me, and I think it's mostly because of the way that I'm able to articulate, defend myself, and put myself in situations where I have public support, maybe, or people around me. There have been a few moments where like that's happened. I had literally an officer say to me and Jake when we were parked in front of Baker Beach, and we were just parked there sleeping, and a police officer knocked our window and asked us to step out, and Jake started resisting, and I was able just to calm the situation down and ask the police officer pleadingly just to let us go and drive away. And the officer literally said to me, I said to Jake, if it isn't because of your friend, you'd be handcuffed and I'd take you over to a correctional facility. So, I mean, not to say that that's I mean, what do I have to do? Use my emotional intelligence to manipulate the situation?
Right.
That shouldn't be done. But I'm saying is, I think that once you're in prison, a correctional officer, it's like, again, not might just
not going to look at you the same.
Mm-hmm.
No.
So again, minor difference, really nothing that holds weight. Either way, enforcers of the law, enforcers of keeping the state in check. Not the state in check, the state keeping us in check.
Yes, yeah.
And using these workers against us.
Yep.
So these minor differences sometimes affect the psyche. But again, I want to repeat, still all camps, that's why I said military officers, correctional officers, they're all part of the working class.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's taken me a long time to also see that. I won't lie.
Yeah, and there would be people who would make distinctions that would disagree with this. I'm okay with that. This is just where I'm at right now.
Yeah. Thanks to Bo for sharing this information. And actually, as a result of me always saying, if you have an idea at the end of every episode, I say that, bring it on. All right. Well, that does it for
thank you, Eduardo, for being part of this and pushing back on me, but also just putting forward your own pretty, honestly, your own kind of thinking on this. It's just muddy.
Difficult. I'm becoming more and more comfortable with, obviously, over the years.
Yeah, it's true. I think the same is true for me.
All right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode or on our blog on Whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you fancy anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, like folks have, to contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Varca with co-host Andy Lipson. You can always find my personal social media handle as @Don Eduardo Varca. And thank you all for listening. Catch you all later. Ciao.
Bye-bye.